Hello and welcome to the Authority of Love. This is another Family Foundation Friday. I'm your host, Greg Williams, and I'm joined again by our wonderful co-host, David Walls, Executive Director of the Family Foundation. David, thanks again. Always great to have you.
Good to be with you, Greg.
And I love that we're getting some great feedback during this season, as if there's something going on. There might be a little something going on. I don't know. Your mailbox saying anything to that effect?
Is there an election?
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's what it is. Yeah. Okay. That sets us up. Listen, we're going to jump right in. David, I think one of the biggest things we know here in Kentucky, other than the candidates, the presidential candidates and state candidates and local, is this issue of Amendment 2. We've talked about it.
Yeah.
I think we need to continue to clarify.
Yeah.
So I would ask you to start with that today.
Yeah, and I appreciate, Greg, the opportunity for us to kind of dedicate this to what I actually believe, Greg. I think this is one of the most important things on the ballot for us here in Kentucky, Amendment 2. But there's a lot of misinformation, and so we just kind of want to go through it, I think, one clear time, and Lord help us to be clear.
Yeah.
But look, this is where I want to start. From a biblical perspective, Greg, we know that parents are the ones that are responsible for raising their children. Proverbs 22:6 commands us to train up a child in the way he should go. The Apostle Paul in Ephesians 6:4 instructs us to bring our children up in the discipleship and instruction of the Lord. Parents, not the government, are the ones who are ultimately responsible for the training of their children, and obviously that includes education. And so that's why our education policy in Kentucky and every other state is so important, and that's why we advocate increasingly for the right of parents to be empowered to choose the education that works best for their children. And so that's kind of what's at stake in this election. And we've got a map here behind us for those that are watching the video, but this has been a powerful map. Kentucky is the only state in our region, Greg, that does not have either a private school choice program, and it's one of only two states, Greg, in the entire nation that doesn't even have public charter schools giving parents
offer any school choice.
Right. So right now, Kentucky students are essentially being left behind in a one-size-fits-all system.
And the data shows that.
Yes.
Over and over again.
Yes.
We can't even go back to Mississippi now and say, well, we're ahead of Mississippi. And I'm not saying that bad against Mississippi because they have it and they've moved up.
Yeah. So what is Amendment 2? What is Amendment 2? It is a proposed amendment to the Kentucky Constitution to allow for more educational opportunities. Again, it doesn't set any policy. I'm going to repeat that. It doesn't set any policy.
No.
But if passed, it would simply allow the legislature to consider school choice policies that could potentially fund students outside of the system in public schools in a way that would work best for families. The ballot language is very straightforward. The opening question that we're all going to be asked, and it's the very last thing on all of our ballots, Amendment 2 is, so that's important. So if you vote straight party ticket, you got to make it all the way down to the ballot. And there's other probably important races too that are might be nonpartisan.
And Amendment 1 is right there. Boy, that's another yes on that one.
Right.
Yes.
But the question is to give parents choices and educational opportunities. I mean, that's how the ballot question starts. So a couple of real quick things. I think it's important for folks to know what Amendment 2 does. And then I know you want to help our listeners understand some of the important misinformation that Amendment 2 doesn't do. But one, what does Amendment 2 do? It creates an opportunity for the legislature, as I said, to consider school choice policies that work best for families. It would encourage healthy competition, Greg, in education. And that's what we desperately need.
And accountability.
Absolutely.
Coming from us as citizens and parents and grandparents,
And it would importantly empower families to seek educational opportunities that more closely align with their own values and belief. Greg, you and I have talked a lot about this, but I think we all recognize that there are many public schools that have become captive to harmful ideologies that have no place in education. And so I ultimately believe that supporting Amendment 2 is an important way that we could help reform the entire education system by course correcting, by putting parents and families more in the driver's seat. And my hope would be ultimately that we would empower more families to send their kids to a school that aligns with their beliefs and values.
Exactly right.
So that's what Amendment 2 does, but we want to spend, I know, a good portion of today's program talking about some of the things that Amendment 2 doesn't do and the misinformation.
Yeah, and let me add as a bridge in here, David, first of all, Ephesians 6 that you quoted, about raising up your children is directly to parents.
Yes.
It's not
Right.
to the church or the schools
Or
or
the
the government.
government.
It's
Yeah.
to parents.
Absolutely.
And that comes from Deuteronomy 6,
Yeah.
4 through 9, where Moses gathered all the leaders and said, you impress this upon your children. That's God's foundational principle for the education of children that starts in the home. And one other thing, many of the public schools are not just pushing bad ideology and agendas, they're mandating it.
Yes.
They're mandating it. So I don't have any children in school, but I got 2 grandchildren on the way and hopefully more down the road. And I want to have that choice with my tax dollars.
Absolutely.
Not just put it in there so you can, if you want to have that in the public schools, that's fine. That's what Amendment 2 will allow us to begin to work on. Did I say that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, so now you said this. I'm going to do it this way, David. I'm going to play the devil's advocate. So what you hear me asking here doesn't mean I agree with it, okay? But I want to play the devil's advocate. These are some of the things. Public dollars, and I think I just mentioned this, but public dollars are just for public schools. What do you say to that, David?
Right, and we've heard the governor, Governor Bashir,
Yes.
Say this over and over and over, and I think it's important to remember again. One, I don't really believe that there are public dollars in terms of the way the other side is describing this.
No.
They're taxpayer dollars.
That's right.
Right? There are dollars.
They would not be there if it weren't for us paying.
That are to be stewarded by our government officials that we have placed in those positions of authority. And when we're talking about education, those public dollars, those taxpayer dollars,
Right.
are to help educate our children.
Yes.
They are not for,
mandate what the government wants.
Right.
Yes.
They are not just for a system. They are for the education of our children. And so I think in many ways this is a stewardship issue, Greg. And we're simply not being good stewards of the significant taxpayer resources that we're spending. And look, the other important thing is there are many, many examples of how, well established that the government has allowed taxpayer dollars to be used by taxpayers, whether that means to private organizations, to tax benefits for nonprofits, other religious nonprofits that serve the community. So somehow this idea that we can't allow taxpayer dollars to flow to the families and then they make a decision on how they want to use them is just not a good argument in my opinion.
I agree with you, and I'll add this: there are a lot of words that are being used that have been used before to scare people.
Right.
Fear based.
Right.
And one of those is the word charters or voucher. This is going to be Amendment 2 is a voucher program.
Right.
What do you say to that, David?
As I said at the get-go, Amendment 2 does not set any policy.
Right.
If Amendment 2 was to pass, it just cleans the slate so that the General Assembly could consider a school choice policy. Nothing changes.
Yeah.
If Amendment 2 passes. There would have to be a proposal in the legislature in the next session with some kind of school choice policy.
Yeah.
So, and again, I encourage folks to go read the language. We've have it posted on our website at kentuckyfamily.org. The word voucher is not used in the word tax credit is not used in the amendment. Think of it like this, Greg. We're asking people. Amendment 2 is asking people to vote on a principle, not vote on a policy.
Yeah.
And so the reality is. And the other side has done a very good job of trying to demonize the term vouchers, and I've even heard them worse than this. Demonize any child that's not in the public school system, and actually call them a voucher student. Somehow, if a family decides to not send their kids to public school, that they're a second-class citizen almost. Yeah. And that's the exact opposite. The reality is what most states are doing that do have school choice are not even properly understood as voucher programs. They are like education savings accounts programs, where again, it's not the government directly funding a school, it's the government returning tax dollars to the family, and then the family is making a decision on where those dollars flow.
And if Amendment 2 passes, we just start that process.
We start the debate.
We just begin the debate and the process, right?
Absolutely.
All we're doing is giving ourselves as citizens and as parents and grandparents the opportunity to speak into this, hold our legislators accountable, and then the government to properly disperse this and have some accountability.
Absolutely.
We'll get to that in a minute. I got another one that devil's advocate here. Amendment 2 will take away money from public schools at a much needed time. Now, research shows that this is ridiculous.
It's
so ridiculous.
And it's also a failure, Greg, of recognizing that most of the funding for our public school system is controlled at the district level from property taxes. There's some dollars that come in from the federal government. All of these things are not things that the General Assembly directly has purview over.
Right.
And so the reality is, as I said, it's a stewardship issue. We're increasingly spending more and more dollars on public education, but the results are just not there. Yeah. And so what other states have done is say, well, we're going to free up a small portion of those resources to follow the family.
Yeah.
And so the reality is, in the public school system, as we sit here right now, most of the dollars are not going into the classroom. They're not going to teachers. They're not going to raise teachers' salaries. And that's why school choice is a win. It's a win for students, obviously. Ultimately, it can be a win for the public school system and for teachers, because it opens the door, as I said, to more competition, more opportunities. And again, the states that have had school choice policies the longest have seen greater improvements in their public school system across the board.
Students, teachers' salaries, all of these things.
So this idea, and you've seen some left-leaning think tanks and others that have made up these ridiculous numbers that say this amount of dollars is going to come out of a certain public school system and this many teachers are going to have. They are just making it up. I don't know how to explain it other than that.
That's why I said the research shows that it's not there.
It's not there.
Their argument does not hold water. And I hope you listeners are hearing this, and you not only listen, but you'll share this to help inform and educate others. Last question that I want to ask, David, and this is on the other side. This is what I would say is on our side, the conservative side. Some say if the government gets involved in that, then they're going to put strings on and control over those monies in those private or religious or charter schools or whatever.
Right.
How do we answer that?
Well, first off, again, it comes down to a foundational principle. If these are properly viewed as taxpayer dollars, then just because we're returning our taxpayer dollars to families doesn't mean the government has the right to mandate anything.
Yes, that's
but
right.
We've got to be vigilant to protect our rights in private schools and homeschooling regardless. But here's the other thing. The General Assembly already had originally passed a limited school choice program that kind of led us to where we are here, that got struck down by the Supreme Court. They put very clear language in that bill that in no way could anything as a part of this program be used to step on the rights of homeschoolers or interfere for private schools.
Right.
So I can promise you the General Assembly will in no way be looking and we'll be there. We're strong advocates of protecting our homeschool community, the rights of homeschoolers, the rights of private schools. And here's the other thing, Greg. Nothing would require any family or school to have to participate if they choose.
There you go. You're taking off the mandate.
Right.
You're giving
you still have that
choice.
Still have that freedom in the same way that as we sit here now, there's a few universities and others that just choose to not participate in certain government programs altogether. We will retain those rights. And then finally, Greg, here's the other thing. In the 30 plus states that have moved forward with school choice, you haven't seen these government interference ramp up. You've actually seen the opposite, a more robust homeschool and private school network continue to develop. And that's what we want to see.
And that's up to the legislature, and we can help inform them and help them as well. So if we pass Amendment 2, so we need it. Give them where they can get the iVoter guide.
Yeah, if folks go to KentuckyFamily.org to our homepage, we published our full Kentucky voter guide, and we have a lot of other election resources.
Yeah, and Youth Fest is coming up with Central Kentucky Right to Life. I want to push that. Lori Parker is going to be on our show next Wednesday. Thanks for joining us. I'm Greg Williams with co-host David Walls, and you're listening to The Authority of Love.